Hi, Vince.
Hey, how y'all doing?
So I was telling Vince I'm beside myself with excitement. Yes, I'm a Breaking Bad freak. I don't care who knows it. It's one of my addictions. Needed something after I gave up meth. Which leads me to my first question. Have you ever tried meth?
I have never tried meth, but I remember one time I was on a road trip down to Florida, and once you hit that mold belt down there past Jacksonville. I don't know what it is, but
you just feel like you've done it.
I started sneezing very, very hard, and I stopped at a Rite Aid or CVS or something. I bought a bunch of Sudafed, and I didn't read the package. I just took like 3 or 4 of them, and I was so wired. I have a lame, plain vanilla kind of take on meth. Probably perhaps it's similar. I don't know for sure, but it was unpleasant. If I was going to be a drug addict, I think I'd do heroin because I like being sleepy. So.
Well, there you go. This is something you've never heard in a Vince Gilligan interview before. So I want to just start with how this came about, the genesis of the idea. I mean, it's so weird. You know, if somebody said, okay, I'm going to go do a show about this milquetoast science teacher, he's got cancer, that's super fun, and then his wife is pregnant, his son has cerebral palsy, and then he cooks meth to make money.
So where did it come from?
Yeah, where did it come from, and what was the genesis, the spark, and then take us through the pilot too.
Yeah, you guys all know, nobody really knows where they come from. I can just tell you when it came to me. I was talking to a buddy of mine who's a fellow Guild member, first East and then West, a guy named Tom Schnauz, who is now a fellow writer on Breaking Bad, but I've known him since 1986 when he and I were in NYU together, went to film school together, and probably back around 2005 or so, he and I had both been on the X-Files. And the X-Files had come to an end about 3 years earlier, and we were not a lot was happening for us career-wise, and we were on the phone one day bemoaning that fact, and wondering what to do next. And we talked about, maybe.
So wait, I'm sorry. I'll keep interrupting you, and hopefully, if I lose the train or he does, you guys will remind us. But so you finish the X-Files, and then you're just doing nothing.
Well, no, I shouldn't say doing nothing. You guys know how it is. A lot of pitch meetings that go nowhere. A lot of ideas for pilots that go nowhere. A lot of movie rewrites, or a lot of meet and greets that go nowhere. So it's not like we were sitting around eating Cheetos, as is our want.
But it's just the frustration.
Well, we were doing that too. Yeah. But just sitting around, not sitting around, but just trying to get stuff going. That never. He and I for instance, wrote a movie script together that we had a lot of fun writing, but that never went anywhere. So stuff like that. So just wondering what to do next, or rather, how to get the ball rolling, get something going. And just feeling, like nothing much was happening, and decided to. I'm sorry, I didn't decide. Basically, not knowing what to do, not knowing which way to turn, figured maybe being a greeter at Walmart, something like that. Switching careers maybe. And then either he or I, and it might well have been him, said, how about we buy an old RV and cook crystal meth in the back? And as we were goofing around on the phone, that image of a guy driving around in an RV with a meth lab in the back just tickled me. And it doesn't often happen this way, but I don't know if y'all have ever had this kind of this experience before. But this character kind of popped into my head. This guy Walter, who I didn't have his name at the time, but this guy who became Walter White kind of popped into my head. This middle-aged man, because we're both the same age, Tom and myself, and we were.
Oh, I thought you meant you and Walt.
No. Well, I feel like I'm way older than he is, but
I think you're way younger than he is.
I'm a little bit younger, but feel. All joking aside, was definitely, starting to have my, perfunctory, middle-age crisis, I suppose. And thinking about that, thinking in those terms, thinking about, have I done all the things I wanted to do with my life, and what's next, and all that kind of stuff. And then this character kind of popped into my head, and I couldn't really shake it out. I just wanted to write this thing, knowing full well that it probably was not going to go anywhere as a TV show. It's a pretty hard to sell TV show, and yet, lo and behold, here we are.
So you got this idea, you had this image of this sort of mild-mannered guy cooking meth. So did that lead you, just answering questions, why would the guy do it? Is that what led you to the cancer? And I mean, talk about, and the science teacher and all that. Can you just talk about the thought process from that idea to...
I guess the image came first, the image of a guy driving around in an RV cooking crystal meth. And then the question of who is this guy? And of course, your first... I'm doing a little forensic reconstruction on this. To be honest, I don't quite remember fully how this whole thing, you know, sometimes stuff just happens in bits and spurts, as you all know. But forensically, reconstructing it, you know, in hindsight, probably my first thought was, well, you know, he's a criminal. But then my quick second thought would be, so what? And I've seen that 100 times. What I think interested me quickly, early on, was the idea of a guy like myself who knows nothing about crystal meth, knows nothing about the life of a criminal except what I've seen in Scarface and in The Godfather and in The Sopranos and stuff like that. And if I had to, me personally, Vince Gilligan, start cooking crystal meth, well, the cooking is probably not that hard. You probably don't even have to be a chemist to do that. But the quick question then is, how do you go about selling it? And if you can sell it, how do you go about laundering your money? How do you avoid scrutiny from the police and the DEA? How do you avoid scrutiny from the IRS? You know, stuff like that. And to me, those questions I was asking myself, I guess, were the thing that interested me about this. The idea of, unlike a Tony Soprano, you know, what a great show that was, but that's a guy, as I recall, born into the trade.
Right.
I was interested in a guy, you know, starting from zero. And I, you know, sort of knew innately that he'd fumble his way, as we all would, through such a, you know, an evolution of his life. He'd fumble his way, and those fumbles would be very funny. So I actually, early on, I was thinking of this show in terms of humor, of it being a funny show.
Well, it seems flat out. I mean, what is so amazing to me, because I'm basically a comedy writer, and I am a comedy writer, and the show is so funny, and it's flat out a comedy to me. You look at one of the things that I really feel is missing from a lot of TV comedy now, and has been for a while, is the element of unpredictability and surprise, and it's just everywhere. The comedy is everywhere, except for the last 2 episodes of season 2. Yeah, I mean, there was no humor in that whatsoever. But just even things I was saying to Holly before, just things like, is his name Badger? Yeah, Jesse's friend who was wearing like the dollar bill sandwich board. He brings the harpoon, you know, whatever that thing was. He brings a harpoon.
Crossbow, yeah.
Crossbow.
Yeah.
And in any other show, you would shoot someone with it, right? This guy carries it around. He doesn't shoot anyone. He can't even shoot a tire with it. So it's just comedy, and it's really sticking to the premise of fumbling, what you were saying, fumbling. These guys have no idea what they're doing, and taking you through what would happen if any of us decided to do it, and just really committing to it.
Good. I'm glad you see that. And you know, you know, it just always struck me as funny, the scenario. Leaving the cancer aside, that's nothing, not too much funny about that. But
was that just to motivate him, to give him a real reason to do it, or? Well,
yeah, you know, it just in purely structural terms. Why would a middle-aged, comfortable, college-educated, nervous about breaking the law type character suddenly become a meth dealer? And you know, you have to let the audience believe why he would make that decision. And it seemed like, you know, speaking personally again, you know, I don't live my life with a lot of fearlessness. You know, I never have, and I think that's what interested me about a character like Walt. This guy, you know, it's the fearless characters and all the characters who have nothing to lose, I suppose is a better way to put it, who do all the really exciting things in the great novels and in drama and television and movies. And I knew I needed to get this character there. So, you know, when you find out you're dying, you can either go, well, I guess there's a lot of ways you could go, but the two fundamental ways you can go, A, you just sort of retreat into your house, into your burrow, and sort of, you know, pull the covers over your head, and the other version is just to say, screw it, and just go out with a bang.
Well, to me, again, rewatching the episodes, because I watched the whole series again, and just kind of thinking about other shows that I love, I was thinking, man, this is a bleak world. I mean, I'm not saying anything you don't know, but, you know, The Sopranos, there's that mobster glamour. So even though it's brutal, you know, and I'm not just talking about the tacky house, I'm talking about there's something, you know, about that. And Weeds, you know, they're very sexy, and she's sexy, and she screws people on top of a car, and this is just like the decorating in that house alone is enough to make you want to blow your brains out. And those clothes that he wears are just so depressing. But ultimately, no, you know what I'm saying? It's just like, oh my God, there's got to be something in that horrible store that's not those, you know, where Walt Jr. buys his clothes. But the wish fulfillment, and Vince is going to make available in the library a PDF of the pilot. I don't think I'm going to have to urge you, because I know you're fans here, I urge you to read this pilot. It's not just a great TV pilot, it's just a great read. And he writes very visually. He really writes like a director. But there's an act break where you talk about him feeling the power of having nothing to lose. Or I actually have the script right here, but I'm too lazy to get off this chair. Spoken like a true writer. If only I was in my pajamas. But that is the wish fulfillment. It's the great scene where he blows up that asshole's car. I mean, how many times have we wanted to do that?
Yeah, exactly. Which was a scene, actually, if y'all haven't watched the show, this is in, what Robin just mentioned is in episode 3, and he blows up a guy's car, a guy who's just one of these Bluetooth wearing, you know, jagoffs, who's cutting in front of him in line at the bank, and
just talking really loud on his phone, and annoying everyone.
Yeah, talking very loudly about nailing, you know, waitresses and stuff, and he runs into him again at the end of the hour, and he's he sees him at a gas station, and the guy's inside berating the gas station attendant or the owner or whatever. So when no one's looking, Walt pops the hood and takes the all the science stuff's fun to write, by the way. Takes the squeegee. Not Ouija. The squeegee. Takes the squeegee.
It's a whole other series where he takes the Ouija out of the car.
We use a Ouija board coming up in episode 3, in season 3, in a fun way that if y'all watch, you'll catch. Takes the squeegee and takes the metal edge of it and lays it across the battery terminals, positive and negative, and shorts out the battery, which I got that idea from my brother. My younger brother working on his car one day out in the driveway, and we heard this enormous boom. And we went outside. He had accidentally crossed the battery terminals. And that thing, man, you do not want to do that. It sounded like it was way louder than a shotgun.
It's so simple, though, as it turns out, to blow up some guy's car.
Yeah, it really works, believe me. So don't try it at home.
Now, about the science, were you a science nerd, or was, again, that something that you just decided to look up? Because the science, it's just a whole other thing. I mean, it's so great, but it also, you know, so often, or at least in a couple episodes, the science, what the hell? The science experience, that's what I'm going to call it. The science thing that he's talking about is exactly what happens in the episode. Like when he goes in and he blows up Tuco's.
Oh, yeah. He's talking about, in one episode, he's talking about, what was the exact, he's talking about rapid change. As demonstrated by the quick release of gas and energy, in other words, explosions. And he mentions fulminate of mercury, and it's sort of in passing. It's just a throwaway to his class, you know, in his high school chemistry class. And then later on in the episode, he's got these crystals that he's he's showing to the very scary, nasty kingpin named Tuco, and the guy's berating him for bringing in meth, even though he's already been embarrassed, and made belittled by this guy in the first place. The guy's, now you're bringing me more meth, and he says, you got one thing wrong. This is not meth. It's actually fulminated mercury, which luckily looks pretty similar. And he throws it down and he blows it up. And yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot the question though. What was
I did too. It doesn't matter. It was just sort of about the science stuff. But I just
I know what it was. The science. I'm not a scientist, not in any way, shape, or form. I have a layman's understanding and appreciation. I've been a long-time Popular Science magazine subscriber. That's about the level I can understand it at. Scientific American would be way over my head. And I was never any good at math. I was never any good at that kind of stuff. But I'm very much, right-brained instead of left or whatever. But I have an appreciation for it, and I wish I had a better, deeper understanding of it. There's something beautiful, as we all probably have experienced one time or another. There's something great about some aspect of life where there are right and wrong answers and no gray area. In math, 2 + 2 = 4 now and forever. There's no debating it. There's no, arguing it.
The craziness of, the line's moving. Is this good enough? Is it not good enough? Is it done?
Yeah,
is it undercooked?
Yeah, you mix oxygen and hydrogen in a certain manner, you get water. A million years ago and a million years from now, it's always going to be thus. So something intrigues me about that. I just appreciate that, although I don't have a deeper understanding of it. But we're all professional liars, so it's easy to bullshit your way through. And we have a lot of help from actual real chemists and actual real smart people.
So are they in the room, or do you have like I did a show once where a character was a lawyer, a DA. So we had a DA, and we would call them up and go, we need a case where this happens and then that happens, and he gets, so they would give us that. But let's talk about that scene that we were just talking about. When you talk about the rapid change, releasing energy, it's also describing what's going on in his life. Things are changing. It's not just the literal setting up of the explosion. So tell me, it's one of the things, among others, that I love about your writing, Vince, is things play on so many levels. They're innately interesting. Here's this guy in the class, and the kids are miserable, and no one's listening to him, but he's a pretty good teacher. That is an interesting scene in and of itself. But at what point did you think to yourself, I want to come up with this lesson that's going to describe this stuff? Or
probably pretty early on in the process. I guess, again, I'd have to sort of dissect it forensically looking backward. But, the short answer and really the good answer is I had enough time to think it through in the pilot. I haven't had enough months of lead time. And with enough time and enough, enough motivation, you sort of find your way through any writing problem. And now that we're doing it on a very tight writing schedule, I just got really, really good writers. And there's 8 of us total, counting me, and we sit around in a room all day long, every day, every weekday, and often on the weekends sometimes too. And we just hammer our heads against the wall. You guys know how it is. We hammer our heads against the wall. We have multiplication of effort, because we got 8 of us, 8 good brains in the room, but we just beat it silly until it gives in, the story, the plot. So,
but one of the things that really also, as a writer and someone who's run a room, and hanging on by a thread by the end of it, there's the way that you plot out the first season and the second season. It really is like a puzzle. It's hard enough to break one story that hangs together and works, but from the very beginning, you've played with time. The first episode, you sort of clue the audience in, you do the title 1 month earlier, and then eventually it's just like, nope, you just have to pay attention, and you just have to pay attention to what's going on. And I just remember the one episode where he'd shaved his head, but then in a later scene he hadn't shaved his head, and you start noticing this whole idea of playing with time. And then by the second season, you have that unbelievable the eyeball in the pool getting sucked into the drain. And I will say both times, the first time I watched it and then I'd already seen it and rewatching it, I'm going, is there something wrong with my DVD? It's in black and white. There's no sound. And then I'm like, oh yeah, it's just something that's, you know, making me pay attention. But how the hell, I mean, you wrote the pilot before you started shooting it. Did you have the whole first 6 episodes arced?
I'm so flattered you would ask that. No, well, for instance, I'm so flattered, and that the honest answer is no. Season 2 that you're talking about that starts with the eyeball. Indeed, we did know what our final scene was going to be. You know, of the season before we got there. We bookended on purpose. We bookended season 2. We started.
Assuming everyone's seen season 2, right? Because if not, I'm going to wreck it for you, and I don't care. You should have seen it. But the whole, I'm really sorry. I do care, but it's just the way it goes.
I'll give you a good example of how, and I'm not bragging that it's on the fly. I would much prefer to have the whole thing figured out. It would make my life easier. It'd make the job easier. But you have to stay open to things changing up on you. I'll give you a good example of this. The pilot, in the pilot, at the end of the pilot, the 2 guys, Crazy 8 and I can't remember. Emilio, thank you, Jesus. I'm not really Vince Gilligan. I just Crazy 8 and Emilio in the pilot. My intention was, and when we directed it, when I wrote it, when I directed it, when we were shooting it, the actors all knew that they were both dead in the back of the RV. They both got gassed with the gas that results when you add heat to red iodine, whatever the hell it was. Phosphorus. Thanks. See, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about.
You've taught them all how to cook meth.
The shame of it is it's the easiest thing in the world, apparently, if you just follow the instructions on Google. So, but you know, it's at any rate, I'm sorry. Crazy 8 was dead. He was deader than a hammer, in my understanding. That was the point. He was dead. And the actor who played Crazy 8 was such a sweet guy. The crew loved him so much that they kept saying to me as we went into production on season 1, they kept saying, oh, why does Crazy 8 have to be dead? We love that guy. He's so nice. We love him. He's so wonderful. And I heard that time and time again, and of course I enjoyed directing him. I enjoyed working with him as well. Max is his name, Max Arcienega, and wonderful young guy, and just a real gentleman, wonderful character. And so all of this, and long-winded answer to your question, is that when it came time to break episode 1, I thought to myself, you know, it would be a really good complication if this guy wasn't actually dead, or if at least one of these guys was not actually dead. That's not to say Emilio, the actor who played him, was a pain in the ass. He was wonderful too, but it just seemed a little too complicated to have 2 guys alive. But having 1 guy alive and 1 body to dispose of, because you know, it came down to, I've never, or at least I haven't often seen that in movies or TV before. What do you do with the bodies afterward? To me, this show is about process in large part. And most movies skip over, you know, a guy shoots another guy in a movie. You know, I don't want to see the aftermath. I want to get on to the next exciting adventure and the next exciting. But to me, it's like in real life, what the hell would you do?
Well, that's what I like, is it really does seem like real life. And I always thought the best episode of 24 is just like they're stuck in traffic. Like, fuck, that bomb is about to go off. Who thought we could drive from downtown to Santa Monica in an hour?
And that stuff works for me as a viewer. That works like gangbusters. I love that stuff. I'm not putting that down. I want to see a show or a movie cut past the boring parts myself. And yet I thought to myself, if I'm going to be honest about this show and honest about what it is, you know, to learn the process of being a drug dealer. And by the way, I pitched it to AMC originally. This show is about taking Mr. Chips and transforming him into Scarface over the course of the series, and that's what we're up to. That's
so you did pitch it, and they bought that.
That whole thing is a whole other long story. I can tell you if you guys are interested about the process.
I'm interested.
But to me, this show is indeed, and that's something I did pitch them. This is a show about transformation, and it's a show about process. Those are the two pitches I gave them. Transformation, a guy from Mr. Chips and a Scarface. Process, how do you go about the process of becoming a drug dealer? And you know, again, in movies, countless times, I've seen the guy kill another guy, and maybe there's some bad feelings about it afterward, but they pass pretty quickly because you got to get onto the next step of the plot. And to me, you know, episode 2, we got to deal with these guys. We could do a whole episode about how do you hide a body? Where do you go here and dig a hole, and then a guy comes along and you get spooked, so you fill in the hole and you drive away and you go to point B and point C. We thought about that, and then we thought, you know, is there another way to get rid of a body? And certainly we wound up with acid, you know, as a means of getting rid of a body.
And also just the fact that it keeps coming back what a horrible chemistry student Jesse was. And I also like how he calls him Mr. White. Like, there's an episode where it gets very, I wish I could remember what it was, in the middle of season 2, where he gets very serious. And it's like the first time he calls him Walt.
We planned that, you know, a couple episodes in advance. Yeah, that was a big moment. We didn't do that lightly. Yeah.
No, but then he goes back to calling him Mr. White again. Yeah. Again, that's what I love about it, is that it's all of that. It's embracing the premise, and yes, it's about transformation and process and what would it really be like, but it's also, you know, sometimes people have the premise and it's like, you know what, I'm not that interested in cancer, I'm just going to have him get better, but now he's a meth dealer. No, this is the premise and I'm committing to it, and that's what the series is. You know,
it's exactly, and it just seems, you know, I don't think we're reinventing the wheel here. It just seems obvious to me to slow down any story you're telling. Or rather, I should slow down. It's a kind of a, that doesn't sound good. You don't want to slow your storytelling down, but rather you want to milk every bit of drama you can find within it. You want to milk every drop you can get. You want to treat it, you know, like it's a sturgeon, and you want to milk every last bit of caviar out of it, and then do whatever you do with sturgeons afterward. But you know, you want to get, you know, so that's why
dispose of the body.
That's why the first 2 episodes after the pilot are all about. We've got a guy chained in the basement with a bicycle lock around his neck. You know, what in the world are we going to do with this guy?
Well, that, I mean, and again, that was unbelievable. And it just shows you the fact that it looked planned. Because I really was wondering, I thought one of 2 things happened. Either this whole thing was structured, or you're so, in a weird way, so loose that you can see what you have and go, okay, I'm going to do that now. I created this little, I created this little problem for myself. That's going to lead me to what the story is. What if this guy was alive? Now what?
Yeah, and again, not reinventing the wheel, but just sort of realizing that drama is in the little in-between moments. If you allow time. If you look for it and if you allow time to play it out, you know, it's just not what television usually does. But I wonder why, because you know, there was a show that came on the air, a new series that came on the air on ABC this last fall, Fast Forward, and when I heard the premise, I was fascinated by it. I thought, this is amazing. What a fun show this is going to be. Everybody goes to sleep for however many seconds, and then they wake up and the whole world is, you know, I thought, and then I watched the pilot, and it was really, you know, if anybody here worked on it or whatever, I thought it was such a wonderful premise and really well done, but I could tell, and I may be wrong, but I had a feeling that the network was telling the showrunners, you got to speed it up, you got to keep it moving, you got to speed it up, you got to. And I remember watching the pilot and thinking, I am so interested in this premise, I wish they would slow down this first hour into maybe 4 hours of television. Because what happens when everybody in the planet falls asleep for 26 seconds? What happens, you know, planes fall out of the sky and all this. And the writers, to their credit, they jammed all that, they got as much of that in as they could, but I would have enjoyed so much more slowing down the storytelling rather than speeding it up. And again, I'm not faulting the writers. I'm assuming this was a network note. And this is the shame of modern storytelling. We are perceived to be an audience of knuckleheads with 1 second long attention spans. And nobody, you know, wants to be in it for the long run. Everybody's, you know, watching in the movie theaters, watching the movie while they're, you know, blackberrying each other and all this kind of crap. And I refuse to believe that that is the case. You know.
Well, then that's one of the things that I you know, I love about Breaking Bad, and again, I highly recommend watching it a second time because I'm such an audience. First of all, I never see anything coming. I mean, part of it is the writing is so beautifully unpredictable, and you know, it has that kind of weird unpredictability and dichotomies of life where you've got, you know, nobody is who they appear to be, but I like that I, as an audience member, have to pay attention. And it never feels slow. And I know why you keep stumbling over that, because you're not really talking about making it feel slow. What you're talking about is shining a light or a microscope on these small moments that when you look at the small moments, they're a huge moment. It creates another universe. I always thought Larry David was such a liar when he said Seinfeld was about nothing, because that was a comedy version of taking these little things. I just saw, or in this last year, that there was this episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where the beginning 3 minutes of the show is just having him try and open one of those plastic packages that's fused together, right, and that's all it was. And I was laughing my ass off, and it's 3 minutes of that. Yeah. Nothing else is happening. There's no story. We don't know where it's going. But that's an example of taking that little moment that we've all experienced. And again, I mean, I know I'm gushing, but I just feel like it works so well on every level. And therefore, if it's not planned, if it's something where you're going, okay, we sort of know, I know what the show is. You're very clear about the tone of the show and what the show is.
Thank you very much, and it helps, and it's just good general advice, I suppose, and probably obvious advice at that. But it's just good to really have an understanding of your characters, and if you truly understand your characters, and it probably also helps to have a great deal of sympathy for them and to feel for them and empathize with them, and if you really get them, then you sort of and if you're honest about how they would react to any given situation, then to me you've got a show. You've got you know, the trick is to stay honest. I mean, we often have ideas for scenes we'd like to do, and every now and then we have a bad afternoon where we get a little lazy and we say, I tell you what, let's hey, we just need a little bit of shoe leather to get us from point A to point B so we can get to this real fun scene that we want to do. And then hopefully more often than not, we stop ourselves. And so I'd like to say it's always me who stops the flow, but sometimes it's some of my writers who work for me who are honest on days where I'm being, you know, a little morally weak, being strong when I'm being a little morally weak, and they say, you know, how would Walt ever do this? How would Skyler ever do that? How would, you know, and we've thrown away some really good scenes that we would truly have loved to have done. They go in a special.
I always joke that it's like going to be my pilot. But just with all those scenes that I want to write, just one after the other. So I want to ask you something, though. When you say, you know, the important part is to know your characters, what kind of, you know, is this an instinct for you? What kind of work do you do when you're coming up with the characters?
Well, to be fair, the character does indeed. There's no character that doesn't evolve over time when a show is actually up and running and on the air. Walter White is not the guy I saw him, completely not the guy I saw him as when I was first writing the pilot, because Bryan Cranston, I mean, just what Bryan Cranston brings to this character is, you know, I don't even remember back to where my contribution ended and his started. So much of Walter White is what this wonderful actor brings to this part, and that goes for all the other great actors, Aaron Paul who plays Jesse, Anna Gunn who plays Skyler, and on and on. It's just, you have to be open to what they're adding to the character.
You have an amazing cast. I mean, I have like 15 questions, and I just want to say, if it doesn't work out between Hank and Maria, I would like to marry Hank. I'm completely in love with him.
You know, Dean Norris went to Harvard.
Are you kidding me?
Dean Norris, who plays Hank, went to Harvard, and I said, "What? Harvard School of Auto Body Repair?" And now I'm at Harvard, so yeah.
Can you talk about, since you brought up Brian, talk about a little bit about the process of casting Walt, and at what point did Brian get involved?
I was very fortunate to have worked with Bryan Cranston back in the X-Files. I wrote an X-File episode back season 6, and this was, I don't know, 1999 or so, in which we needed a character. We basically, I was doing my homage to the movie Speed, and so we had an episode where Agent Mulder's trapped in a car, a speeding car, with a guy holding a gun to him, gun to his head, and making Mulder drive west, drive very, very fast. And if the car were to stop the man holding Walt hostage, his head would explode. And it was long involved. The inner ear and the radio waves sent by Project HARP, run by the Navy, and it kind of made sense if you squinted. But
that's got to be the beauty of the X-Files. It's like, yeah, it's one of those. His head's going to explode.
That was a fun job. Boy, that was my second greatest job ever after Breaking Bad. Oh man, what a fun job that was. But and a great learning experience. But long story short, we needed an actor who, and this guy. And to be fair, I was borrowing a little bit, too, from a wonderful episode of the TV show Homicide, which was a very underrated, wonderfully written, wonderfully acted and directed show. They had a wonderful episode where a guy gets pushed in front of a subway train and gets crushed, squeezed between the platform, and they know as soon as they airbag him out of there, he's going to die.
I remember that episode.
And the beauty of that episode, the thing that never occurred to me as a writer, was make that guy an asshole. And he's played by Vincent D'Onofrio, and he's a creep, and yet you feel sorry for him when he dies in that episode of Homicide, because the guy's a wonderful actor and it was wonderful writing. So I was perhaps borrowing a bit from that too, because I wanted a character in this car for the bulk of the 43, 44-minute running time of the episode. I wanted this guy in a car with Agent Mulder, a guy who is a kind of a bastard. And he's ranting on about the international Jewish conspiracy that runs the government, and he's just a creep. He's anti-Semitic, and he's nasty, and he's weird, and he lives out in a trailer in the middle of nowhere. And there's no good reason for you to feel sorry for this guy. And yet, my fervent hope was you do. And when he, not to give it away, but it's been 10, 11 years, when he dies at the end, you just want to feel sorry for this guy. And some of that's
just before Brian had done.
Yeah, this was
Malcolm in the Middle.
Year and a half before Malcolm in the Middle. So, long story short, this character, you had to care about this guy, or else the episode was not going to work. And you needed a guy who was scary, and who was a great actor, and who had charisma, and who'd hold the screen with our TV star David Duchovny for an hour. But you also needed to feel some fundamental humanity, some sympathy for this guy and his plight, even though he's kind of a bastard. And long story short, we read a bunch of actors. We read some damn fine ones.
Want to name any of them? Or?
No, no. But there's some real good ones. And no, through no fault of their own, they weren't the guys. And then one day we were getting a little frantic, and then suddenly our casting director brings in Bryan Cranston, who I didn't know from Adam. I only realized later I had seen him on Seinfeld playing the Jerry's dentist on Seinfeld, and I realized later he was the one-armed officer in Saving Private Ryan, who sends Tom Hanks on his mission, and he played Buzz Aldrin and From the Earth to the Moon, stuff like that. And he's such a chameleon; he looks so different from role to role. I had no idea these were all the same guy. And he came in and he read this part, and he just blew us away. And he gets a job. He does a wonderful job of playing this character. And he's such a pro, too. He goes through so much physical pain doing this episode, and he never complains. And he's just great. And then a year and a half later, Malcolm in the Middle comes on. And it takes me a while to realize this guy is the same guy, because he's so goofy and funny, and I say, oh my God, that's our guy from our episode. And then I remember saying to myself, I didn't know he could be funny. I had no idea this guy had these comedic chops, because he had never been called upon in our brief time together to exhibit them. And long story short, you know, if all I had known was Malcolm in the Middle, I probably, not probably, I would not have had the foresight, I would not have had the imagination to hire this guy. If all I'd known.
Did you just have to offer it to him at that point, or?
He did not read for it. He came in and we had a meeting, and he read the script, and he told me in hindsight later, and I was playing it kind of cool because I wanted to, you know, make sure I got the right deal and all. He says, but I was desperate to do it.
You guys, again, read this script. I mean, read the script. It's.
But he was in my mind the guy, because I knew he was the whole package. In a nutshell, I knew he could be dark and dramatic from the X-File episode. I knew he could be very funny from Malcolm in the Middle, and I knew he had an innate humanity and likability that this character needs. The show doesn't work without Walter White being somebody you can sympathize with, because this guy does, you know, if you guys haven't seen the show, this guy does some seriously twisted, dark stuff as the series progresses.
Well, yeah, and by the end, he's like a mass murderer.
Yeah, well, I'll give him a pass on that one, but
give him a pass.
I would call that manslaughter, not murder.
Manslaughter. If you, it depends how you interpret the chain of events that lead to that. But talking about Brian, one of the things that I really noticed rewatching it is how much of the first season he plays with his mouth hanging open. Yes. It was like such a great choice, because it's like, I can't believe what's going on. I'm befuddled. I'm in over my head. And his two looks were this. And
it's true. He can actually suck in his jaw so it looks like he has no chin.
Yeah,
I don't know how he does it.
So angry. I've been angry for for 50 years.
Yeah, and I've been angry and squashing it down into a tight little black hole inside my midsection. So squeezing it so tight, I myself am not even aware of it until I get my cancer diagnosis. This guy, if you ever meet him in person, you won't even recognize him, most likely. He's just this cool, hip, good-looking guy in real life, and he plays this, little milquetoast as Walter White, or at least he did in the early episodes. He's getting a little cooler as the show progresses. But you just don't even recognize this guy from role to role. At least I don't. And so much of Walt is indeed Bryan Cranston. He came to me in the pre-production on the pilot. He came to me saying, "I want to hit about 178 pounds. That's a good weight." And I'm like, "Huh? What?" He's like, "No, I just want to be a little bit doughy. I want to be a little bit gone to seed, a little bit fleshy." So 178. He knew exactly to the pound the weight he wanted to hit, and by God, he hit it.
Well, and I mean, that really, talk about a lack of vanity for him to be standing there, not only in that underwear, but like old. Like it's not new underwear.
Well, that's a good story, too. I was a wimp as a director. We were out in Tahajali, which is this Indian reservation out about 40 miles west of Albuquerque, shooting with those beautiful red cliffs and whatnot. And we're shooting these sequences when they're out there cooking in the pilot. And also it was cold out there. It was, I'm bundled up in a parka, and it's, maybe 40 degrees, 42 degrees, and he's running around in his shirt and his tighty whities. But on the day he was first to appear dressed that way, I wimped out, and I went to him as the cameras were being set up, and I said, or it might have been the day before, but I wimped out, and I said to him, so the scene we're doing, are you, as written, are you... he said, well, what? I said, are you, as written, the character is in his underwear. He says, yeah, what? I said, well, would you be more comfortable in sweatpants? He's like, oh, yeah, absolutely. But what's your point? And I said, well, okay, so underwear it is. How about boxers? Would you be more comfortable in boxers? He said, what's the most pathetic kind of underpants that exist? I said, tighty whities. He says, yeah.
Well, he looks...
So that's what I'm going to wear.
Despite the fact that he's totally in character, you can see how much fun he's having. It's like, how ugly can I look? I'm friends with Lisa Kudrow, and when she did Opposite of Sex, she was so excited about that ugly hair and those hideous outfits. And, if you're a real actor, you stand out in the 40-degree weather because that's the fun for you. is having those moments where you're the most pathetic that you can get.
Yeah, it must be true. I God bless him. I couldn't do it. You don't want to ask someone as a director, at least I don't want to ask anyone to do something I myself wouldn't do. But it happens all the time on Breaking Bad. I wouldn't, goddamn, if I'm going to stand out there in my underpants, you know. But he's you know, Brian he's a trooper. He's a prince.
Were you, to me, as many wonderful, complex relationships there are, the centerpiece of the show always seems to me Jesse and Walt, and that sick kind of father-son horrible relationship. And talk about another sympathetic character. Jesse's such a loser, and then there's that poignant in season 2 it got a lot more into the family and what's it like to be the family that has these kids that are these degenerate, horrible drug addicts. And his mom has this great line where she says to Jesse, "Why are you like this?" And just it literally made me cry. But Mr. White, Walter is so mean to Jesse. He's just calling him all sorts of idiot, stupid, loser, pathetic, but yet, can you just talk a little bit about that relationship and how you see it?
It's you know, I said it was the odd couple for the 21st century, but it's probably more like Laurel and Hardy for the 21st century, but in the sense that, and I'm sorry, I always get these confused. Stan Laurel was the skinny one, right?
Yeah, he was the tall, skinny one.
Right, and Oliver Hardy was the Walter White character,
yes,
who was always exasperated at the meekness and the innocence of the Stan Laurel character, and that's probably a better analogy. But you know, you bring up a very interesting point too. That is not a typical TV convention. It's kind of an experiment for me, this show. I'm trying to see how unlikable we can make this guy and still have the audience hang on.
Are you talking about Walt?
I'm talking about Walt, because
yeah,
it was something you said a minute ago is very true. Walt's a protagonist, no question about it, but he is not the hero. I mean,
he doesn't even like his kid. I mean,
well, I think he
sort of does, but you know what I mean?
I think he has love in his heart for his family, but I think this is a guy who's been wrapped so tight for so long. As he says in the pilot, I am awake. But unfortunately, being awake for this guy leads to some very dark things. And as the show progresses, you realize, you know, this construction of I'm doing this for my family because I need money. I desperately need money for my family is a load of horseshit. This guy's doing it because it gets him hard, because it literally and figuratively, because it makes him feel good about himself, because it makes him feel alive. He's not a good guy. And yet I love the character. I mean, you gotta love your characters, it seems to me, if the show's really going to be firing on all cylinders. And
you have to love them, but you don't have to like them. Or you think you have to like them too?
There's probably a better way to parse this, but you gotta be intrigued. You can never lose your interest in them, I suppose. And this guy, the darker he gets, the more interesting he gets. I'm not trying to make him repellent. I'm trying to see how believably dark he can go, and yet still hook us, still hold our interest. But back to Jesse, played by Aaron Paul. This kid is going to be a star. He is such a sweet young man, and he is such a fine actor. And I mean, he came into this job with amazing skills. But I think Bryan Cranston is also. I think he'd be the first to say. I would think to give props to Bryan Cranston for being such a good role model to him as a young actor, and you know, the sense of professionalism, the sense of you know, this is a job, and we come in and we do our best on this job is a wonderful thing. Is a wonderful thing to learn from. And I think heck, Brian's work ethic is even rubbed off on me, but I think it's you know, I see these two guys together, and they really respect and like each other. There's so much fun when the cameras aren't rolling together, and it really is to my feeling kind of a father-son or older brother or uncle and nephew kind of a feel, where they really respect each other and like each other. And these guys, it's hard to go toe-to-toe with Bryan Cranston as an actor. I mean, I'm no actor, but I just, you know, if I were an actor coming in to play against this dude, I'd be quaking in my boots. And but Aaron Paul brings it every episode, as does Anna Gunn and
yeah,
Dean
the whole
Norris and Betsy
ensemble
Brandt.
really holds their own.
Yeah.
And is it Dean Norris?
Dean Norris, who plays Hank.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know the name of the actress, but Marie is amazing.
Betsy Brandt, who is a wonderful, she should have her own talk show. She is so damn funny in real life. She is just, yeah. I'm so blessed. You know, you can write the best show in the world. I'm not saying this is it, but I'm giving the example that you can write the best show in the world. If you don't have the right actors, you got nothing.
Well, it's always the, you know, X factor whenever we do this is you've got to have this confluence of things that all work at the same time. You've got to have the writing, and then you've got to have the network who wants to air it, and then somehow or other the audience has to turn up who wants to watch it, and then you've got to have the actors that do it, and the actors, then you get into this really interesting symbiotic thing with the actors where they feed you and you feed them, and you know, and they show you what to do with them. I'm sure you get a lot of ideas for stories also, just not from the actors as people, but from watching them perform.
Oh, absolutely. Learn stuff all the time from watching the way they you know, Aaron Paul has a very interesting way he stresses the lines that I write, that we write, that my writers and I write. The actor that comes to mind when I think about it is actually Christopher Walken at his best, when it's a subtle thing he does, and that Aaron Paul does, but they're stressing certain words that never in your wildest imagination when you're writing them. Because, you know, probably you guys are a lot the same as what I do. I talk out loud to myself when I'm writing. When I'm writing dialogue, I read it out loud because I don't want it to be a mouthful.
You read it back to yourself, or you say it out loud as you're writing it?
A little of both. Say it out loud, write it down. Ooh, that's good. You know, or that'll work. You know, or write it. You know, if it's a long speech, write it in bits and starts, and then, you know, say it out loud under my breath over and over again to make sure it flows. But I never, when it comes to the other actors, I often nail it in my head. In my mind's eye, I can hear them saying it, and I'm very often right in the way that they will stress certain words, leave other words unstressed. I usually get every other actor right except for Aaron Paul. He stresses certain words in certain ways that I would have never seen coming, and it's always wonderful. It's just a pleasure.
Certain actors, I know as writers, you know, there's always that temptation to underline certain words that you want them to hit, or do these parentheticals, and, you know, usually really good actors hate that. They don't want to be told. But if you, and again, to bring up Lisa Kudrow, who I've worked with a lot over the last 20 years, you never want to tell her what to hit a word, because she's going to do something that's just going to surprise you. But I wanted to ask you about Jesse's dialogue, especially now meeting you. You know, I mean, it's always so interesting to see that this show came out of this very gentle man appears. Philip, rewrite that. But that Jesse dialogue, you know, I would be so like in over my head to write that kind of lingo and have it sound authentic. Can you talk a little bit about writing that? You know,
it's fun stuff to write, and I don't know. I just at the risk of sounding, to me, the dialogue is always the key to the dialogue is cutting out everything you don't need. To me, that's to me, I want this show to. I don't know where it comes from. I sort of hear that stuff in my head, and I don't take any great credit for it. It just. But then the danger is, at least in my estimation of the job, the danger is to write a bunch of fun dialogue that makes you chuckle as you sit there in your chair and get kind of precious about it and want to keep every line of it. To me, the real hard part of the job, and yet one of the most crucial parts, is when you've got this fun dialogue, cutting it down, killing your darlings, as Faulkner said. I don't know if he meant it in this sense, but that's how I take it. And getting the scenes down to getting them down whenever possible, getting them to the point that they work without dialogue at all. One of my writers, Peter Gould, has been with me since day one, came to me last season beaming. he was so excited, and he said, I just realized in my script there are 4 pages, a little over 4 pages, 4 2/8, with not a single word of dialogue. Got through 4 pages without writing any dialogue.
Well, the first 3 pages of the pilot, there's the monologue that he gives to the video camera where he's saying, to his family, you're going to find this stuff out about me. But prior to that, it's all
that
visual.
Stuff starts on page 2 or 3. I do, take it with a grain of salt, but other showrunners, very much, other directors, other folks in the business very much don't want the writer saying what's, they don't want the stuff in between the dialogue. But to me, the stuff in between the dialogue is what it's all about. The dialogue is just the maraschino cherry on top. I mean, if you can tell your story without dialogue, and you can't always, but also you got to keep in mind, I mean, what do people do in real life? Very often in real life, people say the opposite of what they mean. So you got to work that in your dialogue. You don't have to, but you can do anything you want. But to me, that's the key to it too. Having the characters saying the opposite of what they really mean, and yet allowing the audience to understand it. And if the audience is going to understand those kind of moments, the crew and the cast need to understand it first. And so you need to put all that in between stuff, in between those chunks of dialogue. You got to explain things, and you got to do it in a way that is not boring the living hell out of everyone who's reading this thing. You got to keep it, I don't know, novelistic as much as possible. You got to keep it short and sweet, but you got to make it clear. Clarity above all.
There's a lot of energy. The energy is why I keep saying you really need to read the script, because the energy in your action lines captures the feel of the energy of the pictures that we end up seeing. There's a pace to it. There's a pace to the writing. There's a humor to the writing. So it's not just very just very straightforward saying we go here and we go there. I'm going to talk for another couple minutes. Then we'll take a break, and then when we come back, I really want to get to a lot of your questions. I know you guys have a lot of questions to ask Vince, but just to talk a little bit about subtext, which is what you're talking about. One of the things I talk about on the shows that I'm running, or the show that I'm running right now, is it playable or not? Are you giving the actor something to play? And by that, it's exactly what Vince was just saying. We don't walk around saying everything we think and feel. First of all, half the time we're not even aware of what we're thinking or feeling. Just think of all the things in a day you want to conceal from people. You may not want the waiter to know you don't have enough money to get the entree. There's a million different things, and I think that's what the actors love, what they like to play, but also for the audience to understand it, you have to have in the stage direction so that his crew and the actors will understand, but also you need to have the audience understand what the actors are thinking and feeling. So can you talk a little bit about how you set those scenes up so we know the subtext? Is that something?
First and foremost, it's hiring, and then it's trusting the actors, and then thirdly, it's trusting the audience. In other words, we've all seen the network notes where is it spelled out enough, is it clear enough, and you have to trust in your actors to sell it, to, does it play, as you said. You have to trust your actors to put it over, to sell it. And you have to trust your audience to get it. Because the truth is, if you're watching a show like Breaking Bad, you're invested. You have to be, because it's such serialized. I don't even call it serialized. I call it hyper-serialized. We start up, a minute after the last episode ends very often. And
those cliffhangers, you're just going, what? I knew it was coming, but not now.
But and you figure if you're
bastard,
it's a show certainly not for everyone, but the folks who are tuned into it are, you hope are invested, and so you don't ever write down to them. You know that they're going to get it if they put in that much effort already, and. It's just, the best way to put it, I guess, I look back over my early writing. Every now and then I'll find a script I wrote 20 years ago, and I'll blow the dust off it, and I'll start reading through it, and I'm amazed how much I spell out in the dialogue, how much stuff that really is obvious to an audience that I wound up spelling out back then. And it just comes with, I don't know, it just comes with time. The more you write, the more you do it, the more you realize half of what you've written in some of your earliest scripts, God knows mine, stuff you didn't need to ever put down in the first place.
You know, you're kind of teaching yourself.
Yeah. I don't feel bad about that. It was all a learning process. Nor should anyone. It's all a learning process. Yeah.
This will be my last question before we take our break. But the show shoots in New Mexico.
Shoots in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
So when you were talking about paring down the dialogue, do you guys have table reads? Or no?
It'd be great. There's just no time. We shoot the show in 8 days. We shoot it on film. It is miserably hard to do. And we have the best DP and the best crew.
Is Ray Villalobos still doing it?
Ray Villalobos, wonderful DP. He shot season 1, and now we have Michael Slovis, who used to be the one of the two CSI has alternating DPs. He was I believe one of the 2 DPs in CSI. Wonderful guy. Fast as lightning. Came to it from being a gaffer. There's basically, you know, directors of photography usually come to it from being an operator, camera operator, being a gaffer. And John Toll, who shot our pilot, the great John Toll, the only living DP to win 2 Oscars back to back. This guy, I've still pinched myself to think that this guy, I got to work with this guy, and he shot our pilot. And he came to it from being an operator. Mike Slovis comes to it from being a gaffer, so it just goes to show, it doesn't matter where you come from, but the gaffer aspect of it for Mike, he just, bam, he puts these lights up, you know, and he's got a great crew, and we get the show shot in an amazingly short amount of time. The stuff these guys do, it just blows me away. And shit, I forgot the original question. But we don't have table reads. We just no time for it. It'd be great, but at that point, when you're running for your life, as you often are in television, you got to trust your actors, and you got to have hired the right ones in the first place. And I chalk a lot of that up to luck, you know, not like I was.
Yeah. I mean, that was. I hope I remember to get to this, but that was another thing I wanted to ask about was the role of luck in this show. Good luck and bad luck.
It's inestimable.
It's inestimable. Oh, so we'll come back to that. We'll go back to your questions. We're going to take a 12.5-minute break. This is the 4th year that we've done this series, and by we, it's usually me and Winnie Holzman, although tonight and last week it was just me. But so this is our, each year we do 6. They are for sale. We have some amazing people we've interviewed over the years, TV and film. You know, we interviewed Nancy Oliver, Lars and the Real Girl, talk about a fascinating story there. Don Roos, not to be missed. Don Roos, you will get obsessed with his kitchen timer. He writes with a kitchen timer. And it upsets people and fascinates them.
I've done that too. I don't stick to it because I have no self-discipline, but that's a good idea. That is.
Well,
yeah, like what I do, I don't know how he does it, but I mean, I'll set the timer for 15 or 20 minutes and say I got to have a page done by then. But then it falls apart very shortly after that.
Well, Don Roos has his whole thing. I think it's available in the library. It's called The Kitchen Timer, and it's very intricate. And what he does is he writes a minimum of 1 hour, a maximum of 4 hours a day. He's a feature writer. You can do that. He decides the day before how many hours he's going to write the next day. He writes in 1 hour increments during the hour, no email, no phone calls, and he works in 2 documents. One is whatever he's writing, and the other is like a journal, whatever. And he just will sit there and go, I mind myself fat, you know, blah, blah, blah. I wish I could go back to sleep. I wish the hour was over. And then he can only work in one of the 2 documents. And then when the hour's up, he can do whatever he wants, and he can write another hour. But people get completely obsessed with it. But those are for sale, but they're also for free in the library. So if you are interested in any of them, sampling them or watching the whole thing, they're available to watch in the library. That's about.
You know what Isaac Asimov used to do? He never had a computer. He never used a computer, apparently. Died in '92, I think. But he had 4 or 5 identical IBM Selectrics, except each one in a different color. And he had a rolling chair, and he would have an essay, a science essay, on the typewriter carriage in one, and then he'd have a short story in another, and then he'd have correspondence in the third one. And he would roll sideways, back and forth, and just.
I'm like that, except on one of them I have Zappos. They're just like different windows. Zappos, email, weather.com, so I can, in my mind, picture myself on a vacation somewhere with better weather. Or at least different weather. So I want to open this up to you guys, because I know you must have a lot of questions. Yes. And wait, I think there's going to be somebody. Here we go, with the microphone. Pass this over to him.
Hi. I've heard you have an unusual post schedule, and that you wait for in the last 10 or so episodes, you let them get to director's cut, and you don't do your cut until after you've done shooting.
Are you in the showrunners program?
I am, yeah.
So you heard Peter Gould talk.
Yes.
Yeah, it's true.
If you'd maybe talk a little about, that seems like a really hard thing to sell to I don't know how you got that idea and how you pitched it to them and had them go along
Vince, will you talk a little bit, too, for those who have not worked in television, what a normal post schedule is versus what you do?
There's really nothing normal about the way AMC does business, and God bless them for it, and that's a good question. Normally on TV, the way we did it on the X-Files, for instance, you don't have that much lead time before an episode airs. You have more lead time at the beginning of your season. You have much less at the end. I remember times on the X-Files, as a producer on an episode I'd written, I'd be watching the final visual effects up until about 6 in the morning on the day that episode aired. At 6 in the morning, we'd have to cut it off, and we'd have to say, okay, this is as good as the monster gets, and then we'd have to ship it to. They'd beam it to New York or whatever they would do. It's Greek to me. But network TV especially, you have amazingly tight turnarounds. And you do not so much in cable, perhaps. We don't. In other words, we're shooting our show. I directed the last episode. We finished shooting on January 28th, 26th, something like that, a month and a half ago. And we don't start airing until March 21st. So we have a lot more lead time, just by virtue of the vagaries of the schedule, And because that was the case this year, and because it was the case last year that we had enough lead time, I am, as most showrunners are, I don't think I'm unusual at all. I'm a control freak, and I'm actually pretty good in an editing room. I'm not good at a lot of things, but I'm actually pretty good in an editing room, and I want to fine-tune the cut of every episode, as producers are allowed to do after the director's cut. And so last season, it wasn't an idea I had in advance. I just was not going to let an episode leave that I had not had cut over. Understandably, the studio and the network were screaming for their episodes, and my line over and over again all last season was, "You can't get blood from a turnip," over and over again. The short answer for how you get anything done is you got to be ready to walk away, and you can't go around threatening it. You can't go nuclear. You can't do the nuclear option. You only get it really once, maybe twice, but you can't go threatening it all the time. You just have to live it. You can't fake it. You just gotta. This show is the best job I've ever had. Breaking Bad. I love it. I will be extraordinarily sorry when it's over. I will probably never have it this good in my life ever again. I may make a lot more money, but I will never have this level of creative control over anything I do. I just know it. I don't mean to be negative, but I just know it. It will never be this good again. But you have to be willing to just chuck it all, and they have to see. You can't say it. You got to mean it, and they got to see it in your eyes.
Yeah, you got to seem really crazy. Like they've got to go.
Not crazy works sometimes, but crazy can.
But crazy that you mean it, that you would really walk away from the show.
Or crazy crazy is a double-edged sword. But they have to know that you don't need the job and that you're going to do it your way, or else you're not going to do it. And it's not about being a tough guy or about screaming at people or anything. Although you got to, I suppose, at moments, male or female, and tough guy, you got to, whoever you are, you got to be ready to do that too, when necessary. But not do it too often. But you just got to be. And with me, I love this show. I want it to be the way I want it to be. I can't accept anything otherwise. When it's bad, it's my it's my fault. And if it's good, I want my share of the credit for that too. But come hell or high water, I've been extraordinarily lucky in my career. I was lucky to make. And to this day, I don't know how I got so lucky, but and I did enough years in the X-Files. I don't need to do it for the money. I just want the show to be as good as I can make it, and they have to know that.
You want to be an artist, like cooking meth is an art.
Yeah, whatever it is you choose to do in life, you want to be as good as you can humanly be at it. And all of this to say, my long-winded way of saying, last year I didn't present them any other option. I didn't go into it with forethought to say, we're going to reinvent the post-production paradigm here, but it just inadvertently turned out that way. And so this year, one of my wonderful producers, Melissa Bernstein, sitting over here, helped make it happen. And yeah. So I don't know if that was a proper answer to your question, but essentially, I could see no other way to do it. I had to have cut, but I couldn't have cut when I was in the writer's room. I couldn't be two places at once, so we had to drag it out, and it added a little more money to the post schedule that we tried to save money in other aspects. And you do what you can do. And
is your writer's room here in L.A.?
Yeah, we're over.
So how does that work in terms of the production, having the production in Albuquerque and you guys being here? Do you go back and forth, or?
It's good and bad. It's good. It's bad in the sense that I'd prefer to spend much more time on the set. And as seasons have progressed, season 1 I spent most of my time in Albuquerque. Season 2, less time. Season 3, that just ended, barely any time at all, except for the last episode that I directed. That's a real shame to me that I can't be out there more often. But what I came to realize pretty quickly is they don't need me out there. The best thing I can do is work with my writers and deliver to our wonderful crew the best scripts we can humanly give them. And the actors know their characters and know how to play it. We have wonderful directors. We've gotten to a point now where we're using directors. We've honed in, we've dialed in. We know our directors that we want to use and reuse. They know the show. The crew, the DP, everybody knows the show. I don't really need to be there. I want to be there, but it's fun, and so that's the downside of having a writer's room 800 miles away, in this case, from production. That's the upside as well, because if we had writing offices a 2-minute walk away from the soundstage, we would I know myself, we would very quickly run afoul of the schedule, because I'd be spending time on the set that I shouldn't be spending, and the writing schedule would suffer, and it's just ultimately it's probably better for me personally.
The show that there's a bunch of people here who worked on the show, but the show that we just wrapped, the writers' offices are upstairs in a building that's attached to the stage, and it's like I call the actors, and I think they know this, I call them my dolls, because it's like when you're a kid and you're playing with your dolls and you can make them do whatever you want and you can dress them up. So I just really always feel like I want to go play with my dolls. So it's so compelling, and then there's the craft services. It's just really, there's so many reasons to want to go in there and not be in the writer's room. Yeah,
being on the set is more fun because you're not banging your head against the wall trying to write something. You're watching the fruits of your labor being executed. You're right. The craft service table is wonderful, and it's just you're BSing with the crew, and it's just so much more fun being on the set. So,
absolutely. You had a question, gentleman. Will you wait for the microphone, please?
You had mentioned earlier a story regarding the pitch, and I was really curious to hear about that because it's so unusual for a network. I know this is cable, but to pick up something this unusual. So I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I'll try to make it quick. I had this idea that I pitched. I told you guys how it came about earlier. I had a pre-existing relationship with Sony, with the two guys who run Sony Television, Zach Van Amberg and Jamie Ehrlicht. They had been supporters of an ill-fated pilot a few years earlier I tried to get going called Battle Creek for CBS. We got to the point of we started to build sets, we had actors, we had, and everything, and then CBS shut it down. They weren't into it, which actually in hindsight was good because I couldn't do what I'm doing now on a network scale. 13 episodes is about one straw less than the straw that broke the camel's back. If I had to do 9 more or 11 more, 24 of them in a year, it'd kill me. So I'm glad that show didn't go. But back to the question you asked. These guys at Sony liked the script Battle Creek I'd written that never went anywhere at CBS. I sort of had an open invitation to come pitch them stuff. And I came up with this idea talking to my buddy about driving around in an RV cooking crystal meth, and I went and pitched it to these guys thinking it's a lark, they're not going to be into it as a TV show. And to their credit, they really liked it. They signed on as the studio. Sony signed on as the studio. Then they accompanied me around town to pitch this idea. At this point, it was not written into a pilot form yet. We knew there's no point going to a network. That'd be utterly pointless, waste of time for us and them. So we went to Showtime. We actually never went to Showtime. We went to HBO. We went to FX. We pitched to a couple other places like TNT. That was one of the best meetings I've ever been in. I pitched to TNT. The two executives, male and female, I can't remember their names. They were a wonderful audience because a lot of you guys have pitched before. It so sucks when you're pitching to someone who's just sitting there staring at you like These two were like, yeah, and then what happens? Yeah, it was wonderful. And then they looked at each other. They said, the end. And Walt has sex with his wife. The end. And they looked at each other crestfallen, and they said, if we buy this, we will be fired. So we could never. They said, can he be a counterfeiter instead of a crystal meth salesman? And to their credit, God bless them, I love these guys forever because they didn't hang me on the hook and leave me waiting. They told me right then and there's no way they're going to buy it. They were great. HBO, on the other hand, kind of sucked. That was
what happened?
HBO, the lady running it, just sort of kept going like this the whole time as I was pitching. Flop sweat on my. She was like, oh God. And then I get to the end. She says, yeah. Thanks for coming in. So, it's anyway. It happens to everybody from time to time. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but of course, the zeitgeist has gone from there. Bye bye HBO. What? Well, whatever.
Well,
it's subjective anyway.
Not to be fair, not to. It's a wonderful network. They helped. We wouldn't be where we are in AMC. FX wouldn't exist. None of these places would exist if not for HBO. They're a wonderful network. This particular lady might have been having a really bad day before I got there. So you never know. But the point is, the real point of the story is you got to roll with it, and I'm not good at rolling with it. I want to see some positive feedback when I'm pitching because I'm really not very good at it. But you're not always going to get it, so you got to. What I always do is I practice. Get my girlfriend Holly to stare at me stone-faced as I pitch. And
how do you prepare for a pitch? I mean, do you write it out and kind of memorize it? Do you do like bullet points? How do you prepare?
I write it out. I write it out into a short document, and I usually winds up being 7 or 8 pages, and then I memorize it. And I'm not very good at memorization. I could never be an actor, but I memorize it, and I commit it to memory. I just read it over and over again, and then I say it out loud, and I time myself, and I try to keep it under 20 minutes, and usually it's more like 30. There's a lot of hard and fast rules when you're pitching that you want to keep it under 20 minutes, and I've never pitched under 30. And I think the key is to give the best pitch you can possibly give, whittle it down to the shortest amount of time you can whittle it down to. But if it goes 21 minutes or 22 minutes or 30 minutes, don't kill yourself over it. Just pitch it fast with energy, with enthusiasm, get through it, and put your best foot forward. And practice to your loved ones who either will be bored and not hide it or feign boredom. It doesn't matter which, really. Just to get used to boredom so it doesn't throw you, because it's throwing me in the room, and I'm like, and then I forget where I am, like a deer in the headlights. So don't let it throw you.
Do you, which is easier said than done, but do you have that original document that you memorized to pitch Breaking Bad? I ask this because one of my obsessions is to collect things for the library that are works in progress or that give other writers a window into the process. So I'm going to bother you later, but if you still have that and we could have something like that for people to look at, that would be incredible. I'll
try to dig it up. We got our house robbed a couple of years ago, and it might have been gone with a laptop that got stolen, but I will look for it. Maybe I still have it. Long story short, to finish the original question, we pitched it all around town. Everybody said no, except for FX. They bought it. They were a nice bunch of folks, went and pitched it to John Landgraf at FX. They bought it, not in the room, but like a week later they said, okay, we'll pay for this. In the room, by the way, he said to me as I got halfway through this verbal pitch, he said, this sounds a little like Weeds. And I said, what is Weeds? and he said, it's a show, da-da-da-da-da. And I said, oh, and I felt the blood leaving my face. And I turned to our Sony guys. I said, have you heard of this show? He says, oh, yeah. I said, why didn't you tell me about this thing? I didn't know this thing existed. I didn't get Showtime, and at that point, I'm not even sure if it had been on the air yet anyway. Maybe it had. I was unaware. And it's a wonderful show, and it sounded very similar, and I was like, oh, crap. Luckily, I didn't know about it, because I would have, if I learned of Weeds' existence, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 weeks earlier, I would have not gone forward. And, anyway, so pitched it to FX. They bought it. They thought about doing it for quite a while. Once I turned in the script, they ultimately went with the show Dirt instead, which made a lot of sense, and they were wise for doing this. It's just because no one knows the future. No one's got a crystal ball. That had Courtney Cox attached, who was a TV star. We had nobody. They were also at the time trying to become more female-friendly, I believe, was their corporate mandate. So it made perfect sense. And then we were back to square one, which meant nowhere, because if all the edgy places in town turned us down, I knew we were dead in the water. So I went on to other things.
Had you pitched to AMC, or that was
no? And what happened with AMC was I knew of their existence. I knew the American Movie Classics channel. I had it on my cable for years, but a guy named Mark Gordon, not the movie producer Mark Gordon, but the other Mark Gordon, hopefully soon to be known as the Mark Gordon, and the other one will be the other Mark Gordon. But he's one of my agents. He was an assistant at the time at ICM, and previously Broder. But anyway, he took it upon himself to send this script to a friend of his at AMC, knowing what most folks didn't know at the time, which is that AMC was in the process of trying to create a scripted programming component, and that they were soon going to have a show on the air called Mad Men, which was not on yet. And Mark Gordon called me up and said, the folks at AMC like your pilot script, because at that point I'd written it for FX, so that thing was done. So sent the script to these guys, and they said, would you want to meet with these guys when they come into town? And I just knew it was just going to be a giant jerk-off. But I figured we'd meet at this bar at this hotel that I like, and I'd get some good,
What hotel?
L'Hermitage, I think, is where they stay.
It's a nice bar.
Yeah, and I figured I'd get a couple of good, free $14 scotches out of it. So, for what the hell? It's good to be stroked, your ego stroked, and get a couple of free, expensive drinks. But I knew this wasn't going to go anywhere, because I said to him at the time, I said, Jesus Christ, AMC Network, why don't you send it to the Food Channel? It's about cooking. So long story short, AMC said from our first meeting, they said, we're trying to get into the scripted business. We like the script. We'd like you to make it. Would you be interested in directing it? And I thought I was on Candid Camera. It was like being Kramer and Seinfeld and falling ass backward into good fortune, But they were true to their word every step of the way. It's a dream place to work. I would highly recommend it. They're great. They had nothing to lose, and they just went for it with first with Mad Men and then with Breaking Bad. And God bless them.
And it hasn't changed them. Sometimes people are so loose, and then they get a couple shows like that, and they...
To my best of my knowledge, it has not changed them, and it's a tricky waters. It's tricky waters to navigate, because I just know from personal experience, the more success I've had, the more nervous I get as a human being. I have more stuff to lose. I have more possessions to lose. I put up more alarm systems. Whatever. I buy another gun. Whatever.
Did you?
Yeah. So exactly. So it's like
house got robbed. I wasn't just being rude.
But it's human nature to be that way. But may AMC be ever thus. May they always be courageous as they are now, because they are truly courageous. They don't give us any crap about, can you make Walt more likable? Can he not be quite so bad? Does there have to be quite so much crystal meth? Does he have to be in his underpants quite so often? He's there. God bless him. I assume Matt Weiner, met a couple times, has similar stories.
Well, we had Matt was my guest last week, and yeah, it's really, really amazing what they did, because there's no really connection between the two shows other than a completely clear original vision.
Apples and oranges, Mad Men and Breaking Bad could not be more different, but are the product in both cases of some writer's passion, and AMC saw that. It sounds like I'm blowing smoke, sounds like I'm doing a commercial for them, but God bless them, because everyone else in town passed on this for various reasons, and they said yes, so I'm forever in their debt.
Yes, this gentleman, and then we'll go to you next.
Yes, since I know more about features, I want to hear more about how you run a writer's room on your show. Like in pre-production, like you said you were in a room with the writers, that you would assign it to one writer. How's that work? And also, since I'm more interested in more about features, could you talk a little about like the comparison to Hancock, if that's not too painful, since I heard that they changed your script, but...
Well, it would have been a lot more painful. Hancock, to start with the second question first, would have been a lot more painful if it had been my original script to begin with. Hancock was originally entitled Tonight He Comes, and it was written by a wonderful writer named Vi Vincent No, who I never actually met, but he wrote a great script. It was very dark, very atmospheric, very well written, and I was hired to come along and inject a little humor to it, I guess. And I was on that job for about 4 years. And made a lot of money. It was a wonderful job, but by the end of it, I was so ready to move on to something else, because you can only rewrite something 25 or 30 times before you start to, But a great bunch of producers, great bunch of folks on that project. But TV and movies, they both have their ups and downs. There's good and bad about both, as you would imagine. If I could only do one from now on, it would be television. The downside of television is it has schedules and deadlines and requirements that can come close, and I'm not even exaggerating, come close to killing you. I mean, depending on your level of emotional investment. But you, the writer, in television, you're the boss. And in features, which, the great thing about a feature is you get hired as a script doctor or whatnot, or you're writing an original. You go right in the south of France. You could be anywhere you want. And you're always connected by fax and internet and all that stuff. But there's just so many cooks stirring that broth. And there's so much lead time, and there's time for everybody to pee on that hydrant, that is your script. And no one has bad intentions. They're not bad people. They're not, it's just, there's so much lead time that it leads to second guessing and triple guessing and quadruple guessing. And in TV, the writers are left alone because the deadlines are so damn tight. There's just not, you get notes. I get notes from studio and on Breaking Bad, studio on the network, but there's, you just don't have time for a lot of notes and tons of notes, and it's, so that's the good and bad of it. And it's always a good experience, even if it's kind of a negative one, whatever it is. I learned a lot from Hancock. It doesn't represent what I think is in any way, shape, or form my best work. and a lot of it doesn't even represent my work, but a committee's work or other writers' work. And you know, I wouldn't want to spend the rest of my career doing those kind of jobs. But having said that, Will Smith, being in a room with him, he's a very smart guy. Very smart guy. And the producers I worked with, Michael Mann, Akiva Goldsman, really smart guys. I learned a lot from all of them. Good bunch of people. It's just, I'm an egomaniac. I'd rather be the boss instead of, you know, the guy in the room taking notes from everybody else. So, having said that, the writer's room, the way we do it on Breaking Bad, is the way we did it on The X-Files. My boss on that show, the creator of The X-Files, Chris Carter, wonderful guy, really brilliant writer and brilliant producer. And what I learned so many things on that show, but one thing I learned in particular that holds me in good stead is to empower my writers as much as they can possibly be empowered. In other words, when I started on The X-Files, I had a creative consultant title that my agent had juiced out of them, but juiced out of them. The word juiced. You know, he had the juice to get it. So I don't want to be misunderstood there. That he had gotten out of them, and
I'm missing what he.
Anyway, I just suddenly dawned on me that could be misinterpreted if I hadn't pronounced it. You know, he had the juice to get a creative consultant title. Long story short. Anyway, what was my point? I forgot.
How Chris ran the
I was just a
writer's room.
staff writer, but Chris Carter was such a good boss that he made us all producers, whether we had the title or not. And it was our job to go to the set, visit the set. It was our job to be in the writers, obviously in the writers' room, but be in the auditions. Help pick the actors. We listened to music cues. We were in the editing room. That's all the editing that I know nowadays is all the time, is because all the time I spend in the writers' room, in the editing room. So anyway, long story short, that's what I do with our Breaking Bad writers. I expect them to take responsibility for their individual episodes. The way we divide up the episodes is simply seniority. We start episode 1. I usually write episode 1. Episode 2 is my next most senior writer. Episode 3, you know, and then we roll them through once or twice in that order, in that batting order, and that's just sort of how we do it. And you know, I expect them to really take full responsibility for these episodes and really do a great job on them, and you know. I want them involved in all aspects of production. So
that's one of my fantasies, is if I could ever work it out for a class at the Writers Guild to take people to a writer's room, because I'm also so curious how you guys work. I mean, you talked about that you knew where the second season was going to end, you knew where it was going to begin, but what happens in between? I mean, do you say, hey, you know, I think it would be really cool to do an episode where Jesse loses his house, or whatever it is, or how do you come up with the? I mean, do you guys, first of all, do you work with a grease board or whiteboard, or
we work not with a dry erase board, because that seems very impermanent to me. I'm scared somebody might come along and you know, rub up against it and erase all our hard work. We board using cork boards and 3x5 index cards with Sharpies, and we fill a whole board, one of those quartet boards. That represents an episode. We have the teaser, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, and a teaser is usually the way we do it, 5 or 6 cards. Individual acts are usually we try to keep them to within 2 lines. We have to fit it all on the one board, or else something's wrong. So each individual act is usually about somewhere 14 to 16, maybe 17 index cards.
And is each card a scene?
Often each card represents a part of a scene. Each card is a story beat, usually.
Color code? I love to color code.
No, because we don't really, if by that you mean like A and B stories and whatnot?
Well, A and B stories, or you know, I guess all your stories are Walt, although interestingly you definitely do have scenes without Walt in it. Now I need a little bit more air conditioning, if anybody
It's the wine.
It's whatever it is. If anybody here has anything can help. All right. So you don't color code? No, I do that if there's different characters and you sort of have to visually see. I
was taught by Chris Carter. Everything I do is just stuff I learned from Chris Carter, and he just wanted it clean and simple, like newspaper headlines, and maybe that was his journalism training. He was a journalist for years before he got into the TV business. And also, we don't really, in my mind, we don't really do A and B stories. I mean, sometimes it might feel that way watching our show, but we don't break it out like that. We just sort of we proceed in a very linear fashion, and we start with the teaser and we sort of work it from there, and we can't really, again, me being a weird obsessive compulsive type, we can't really go forward. We can't skip a scene and go forward. We don't usually work that way. We have to build it brick by brick, and just like you build a building, you can't skip floor number 2.
But do you know where an episode might end? You may go, oh, I like this ending, or am I misunderstanding? Or you literally just start at the beginning and you see where each scene is going to take you?
Yeah, we see where we will have ideas. We will often have ideas where the episode ends, but we flesh it out brick by brick. Even though we will have often touchstones that we want to write to, or we'll have an ending we're working toward. But more often than, well, I don't say more often than not, but very often we will have what we think is the great ending, and then we will realize we've got too much too much real estate, too much stuff to cover, or not enough real estate to. In other words, that great ending will push off to the next episode, because
it's fantastic.
Yeah, which is the good part about regular serializing of a show. Sometimes you run out of real estate, so you got to push off that great scene until the next episode. We've done that many times. So.
Cool. Next question is this gentleman here. Microphone. Oh. Yes, you.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. I'm just trying to imagine Breaking Bad before you knew Bryan Cranston was going to be on it, before you knew about what episode 2 was going to be, and when you're just coming in and pitching the pilot. And I'm just curious about, because we hear a lot of things now about people asking, what does episode 100 look like? Where is this going? And on a more micro level than the Mr. Chips into Scarface thing, how much did they want to know about what actually was going to happen in this process-oriented show?
Good question. I had a meeting at Sony, which is our studio. This was pretty early on. This is the meeting when I said this is going to be taking Mr. Chips and transforming him into Scarface. And I sat down with these folks, the Sony and AMC executives, and I kind of gave them highlights. I had certain scenes that I had in mind, honestly, some of which we have never done and may never do. But I was very lucky in so many ways I can't even count. But one way I was lucky is that AMC was so new at this that they don't do things the way a normal television network would do, and they didn't require a show Bible, for instance. They didn't require. They just kind of assumed it would work out, and they believed in the original script, and I pitched them some highlights of what at that point in my mind then was going to be season 1. I didn't connect all. I didn't pitch them all the connective tissue. I didn't get them from A to B to C to D.
Watching the pilot again, it occurred to me just how.
Do you want to give him the mic? I want everybody to be able to hear.
When we were watching the pilot again, which I'd seen before multiple times, it occurred to me how much Walt both has and hasn't changed. In where he is now at the end of season 2, it's gotten so much more dark, and yet we still care about what happens to him.
Good.
And so it is both the same show as it's always been, and also very different from what it's been. And so I'm just wondering how, I guess, AMC must have been a really good get, because I can imagine a lot of other networks trying to bring you back to the Walt that we see in this episode.
Absolutely. Without doubt. You're absolutely right. There's no other way to say it, but that television, to me, historically, television is about protecting the franchise. And that's not a bad thing. I'm not putting that down. That's not a negative. But when you watch MASH, for instance, of which I've seen every episode and I think is one of the great shows of all time. But somehow they managed on that show to keep 2.5-year police action going for 11 or 12 seasons. You know, except for the fact that actors, all of us, age, and you can chart that, you know, on any show. Gunsmoke, you know. Marshall Dillon on Gunsmoke in season 20 is fundamentally the Marshall Dillon of the first episode. This is what I mean by protecting the franchise, and it's a good thing. Agent Mulder and Agent Scully, I was 7 years on the X-Files. We would take them as far as we could take them in any given episode. We would have terrible things happen to them. We would have life-changing things happen to them, and then we would reset, sometimes in ways that were more believable. Other times we kind of just glossed over it, to be honest. And they reset back to the Mulder and Scully that you know and love at the start of the next episode. You know, somebody dies in Mulder's apartment, and next episode that's kind of forgotten about. And now we're back to, you know, yet another case. And there's nothing wrong with that, and I'm not putting that down. But to me, that's what television does and does well. They protect the franchise. They give you a place to come visit, tune into, and visit with folks that you like, i.e. the stars, the actors of any given show, week in, week out. But I just wanted to do something different. And I'm glad to hear you're still liking Walt. There will be, I got a feeling with our show that certain folks are going to, different folks are going to have, every person out there watching is going to have a slightly different tolerance level for how bad this guy gets. Hopefully most folks will be in it for the long run, all the way through to the end, but some folks have probably, I'm sure, have already tuned out because they're like, this guy's just too nasty. Why am I going to spend time with this guy every week? But to me, that's the fun of it. That's the experiment. And AMC, to their credit, God bless them, and Sony too. Big company like Sony, but to be fair, they've never really given us the note, which is, can you make them more likable? We've never, God bless them, we've never gotten that note. I'm not even sure why some days, but I'm glad, and I hope it's always that way.
You know, just the comment that I want to make is, because I'm sitting here going, why do I still like him? Because I can't. You know, it's been very, very hard to not have the show on the air, you know, and just go, what, you know, because you get really, talk about addicted, you get super addicted to it. But I'm thinking about, I'm not going to say what it is because I know people who haven't seen it yet, but the second to the last episode, there's an unbelievably shocking moment.
That was the one time they got a little nervous, yeah.
That being said, it was heinous, but I understood why he did it. I understood why he did it. So even though I don't condone it, and even though he really crossed a line for me, I understood. And I understood from looking at it, I mean, talk about brilliant acting. He's looking at it, he thinks, what should I do? And you see him realize all the problems that he thinks will be solved in that moment. And but I understood why he did it.
Good, and that was that moment you referred to is the one time that they called us up and they said, are you sure you want to take them this far? Because there's no coming back. There's no going back after you do this. And they were, in a very real sense, right. And it was a good network note. And they kind of scared me because they didn't tell me you got to do it this way. They just said, are you sure you want to do this?
Yeah, really and especially
through.
When you have complete freedom from people who are like, yeah, and then they go, you sure you want to do this, Johnny?
Well, as we all know, with freedom comes responsibility, and it behooves you as a showrunner or a writer of a movie or whatever. If you get final cut on a movie as a writer, director, whatever you wind up with, it's not wise to stop listening to people just because you don't have to listen.
But ultimately, you decided to go with what you...
We probably did, and they didn't make us, but we probably did tone it down a little from my first idea was actually even rougher.
Wow.
So the first idea was that he doses her up on purpose.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was but what you ended up with, and this is one of those things that is... You know, I keep wanting to get back to the idea of luck, good luck, bad luck, happy accidents. I did read an interview with you where there were supposed to be 8 episodes the first season, and
9
episodes, and because of the strike, production was halted, and so that there were certain, obviously, you'll tell me if this was accurate or not, but there were certain things that you had been planning for the first season that you didn't do, that in retrospect you were glad you didn't do because you thought it would have taken it too far. But I think what you wound up with personally was so much more interesting because it was that decision in the moment, and it was more ambiguous, and it just sounds to me, it's easy for me to say, but more interesting than what you had planned.
Well, and it's absolutely true. I've been again, I feel like a lottery winner here because the fact that I didn't get to do the ending that I was originally, the cliffhanger that I was originally going to end season 1 with, is very fortuitous for me because I'll just say it now, the original ending for season 1 was going to be Jesse Pinkman being killed horribly in some drug deal gone terribly awry, and that was my idea for the end of season 1.
Great idea, Vince.
Well, it would have been like the most boneheaded idea ever, but everything I said earlier about slowing down the storytelling, or rather milking out every little moment of drama you can find, I was going to work against that because I was scared that I didn't. I just in my gut, I knew I had to end the season with a real big bang. I had to throw this kitchen sink at it. You know, I had to give the audience reasons to tune in the following season, and I was lacking confidence. I was nervous about, gee, are they into this enough? So let me just go hog wild, go nuts at the end here. It would have been wrong on a level of why in the world would you get rid of as wonderful an actor as Aaron Paul? But beside that, it would have been wrong from a lack of being truthful to the story that you're telling, kind of a thing. It would have been not believing in the story you're telling. It would have been going too far too fast. It would have been everything I don't believe in. And yet I was poised to do it, so I kind of got saved, and I'm very lucky that way.
Will you talk a little bit about, do you consciously, you must, but consciously think about the role of good luck and bad luck in the show? I mean, one of the things that I thought of rewatching it is this really got this Perils of Pauline quality, where every minute, you know, the worst thing that could possibly happen happens, and then something weird happens, like the great episode where I think it's Tuco's father has the stroke and he keeps hitting the bell, and I mean the tension in there, and then they bring him in and he's being questioned, and they verify that no, he does know who the president, and he's like, and then we're going, oh my God, and the luck is the guy won't rat on them. He would.
Yeah, he takes an enormous dump instead in his wheelchair, just as a show of disrespect to the DEA. As much as he hates Jesse Pinkman, he hates the DEA even more. And he's an old school drug dealer, and he's not going to ever help out the DEA. So it is fortuitous for Jesse, but it is in keeping with the character. I always say the writers, because we do have a certain amount of what do you call it? What's the right word for it? We have a certain, every now and then on our show, we have certain things happen that are fortuitous for storytelling, that are, what the hell's the word? So that's serendipitous. It's a very obvious word. And
coincidence?
Coincidence. I'm sorry. It's the wine, I suppose.
Do I get anything?
Yes.
Getting that right?
I get a high five. We have a certain number of coincidences on our show.
Well, the one that I was just thinking of was when Jane's father winds up in the bar sitting next to the wall. That would seem like a big coincidence. That's a big coincidence. And my writers, every now and then in that case, that's a good case in point, my writers say to me, this is very coincidental. Coincidences feel like BS. And my philosophy on it, and you all are free to disagree, my philosophy on it is, if it's a coincidence that's bad for the main character, it's completely cool, storytelling-wise. If it's a coincidence that's good for the main character, it's bullshit. So I said to them, think about what happens here. Walt winds up sitting next to a bar. And by the way, and you'll see if you watch season 3, because we never forget anything. At least so far we haven't. We never leave things hanging. Walt will reference it in a very important moment in season 3. The sheer coincidence of it, in fact. Not to give too much away, but to me,
you know, a coincidence of winning the lottery right at the moment you need money the most is absolute lazy writing and BS. But at that moment, Walt sitting down next to the guy who turns out to be Jane's father is the worst possible thing that could have happened, because if you watch that scene closely, this guy enjoying his beer and giving Walt parenting advice is what puts Walt over the edge and drives him to go to Jane's house in the next scene. And the terrible thing that happens next is part and parcel because of the coincidence of running into this guy. So it's, in fact, a very bad thing. So, you know, I'll take coincidences all day long, just so long as they make the protagonist's life tougher, which is, you know, the essence of drama. So. Well,
and especially, I mean, Breaking Bad is just such a beautiful example of it. I think sometimes we're so conflict averse in general. People don't want bad things to happen and they don't want conflict, but of course, you know, it took me so long when I started writing where they're going, they need obstacles. It's like, that makes me really uncomfortable. But of course, you can't tell the story. But I also love, you guys must just go, why did we write that? How the hell are we going to get out of this now?
Every season, at the end of every season, we do our best to paint ourselves in a corner, and then we spend, at the beginning of the following season, we spend weeks in the editing room saying to ourselves, we did this year. I mean, after the big thing that happens in the end of season 2, we were in the room weeks, and I think at one point in despair, I said, we're fucked. I mean, what do we got?
If you only say that once, though, you're in good shape.
I've said it many times. I'm a very negative person to begin with. I say it many times, 3 or 4 times a day. But we wind up so far, and there may well come a day, knock on wood it won't, may well come a day when so far we haven't been able to unfuck ourselves, but that day may come. But so far so good.
Unfuck, yes, that's my new favorite verb.
Do you know where the series is ending? I mean, it seems like you have this vision, so do you know how many seasons you're going to have?
I'd like to say yes. I don't really. There's a couple things at play. There's the greed that I feel toward wanting more of this job, not money-wise, but I want this to go as long as it possibly can. I don't know right now how long that will be. In my mind's eye, I see at least a season 4 and hopefully a season 5. But you don't want to leave you want to leave the party with the other party goes wanting more. You don't want to be that guest that just won't leave. You want that with your TV show too. And it's hard. It's very hard to know. It's next to impossible. Again, luck will either play a hand or it won't. Either good luck or bad luck will play a hand. But you want to take it. You want to explore everything you want to explore, but you don't want to overstay your welcome. I can't promise we won't. I can't promise what'll happen one way or the other. I think the smartest thing currently in TV is the way they did it on Lost. Apparently, I don't really know the show that well, but I know that a year and a half ago, the folks who run Lost said, we're going to end this show at such and such a date at the end of season X, da-da-da. Brilliant. I wish more shows did that. I would like to do that ourselves. Right now, we don't even know if we're going to get season 4, so the future is very hazy, as it is on most shows. You can only really get away with that on an out-of-the-box hit such as Lost. But I think it's brilliant, because then everyone knows what they're writing toward. The writers, the showrunners of Lost, all are working in a room together, I assume, building it brick by brick toward an ending that they are starting to sense or perhaps already know.
They're sitting around going, how do we make all this seem like we knew what we were doing? What the fuck is a smoke monster?
By the way, that's the way it was on the X-Files. It's the way of television. It's very rare to know where you're going. Hey, for a good case in point, you said to me a few minutes ago, you said, did you know you wanted to write an episode where Jesse loses his house because his parents realize that he's got a meth lab in the basement and they kick him out? You know why that happened? We winged that. We were just tap dancing as fast as we could. What happened is the house that we use for Jesse's house in a nice neighborhood in Albuquerque, New Mexico, went up on the market. And it was sold out from under us. And the nice lady who had been renting it to us said, gee, I got to move. I need the money. And it was on the market for a while. We kind of prayed that it wouldn't get sold. But sure enough, it did. And that episode when his folks kick him out was just a very rapid response to the fact that we no longer had a major set.
But
and as a matter of fact, if you watch the last episode as he's being kicked out, one of the last episodes, early season 2, the shots don't frame the roof. And that is because there was no roof on the house at that point. It was being re-roofed, you know, as we were, and they let us, we had to pay some exorbitant amount to the new owners. Maybe it wasn't exorbitant, to be fair, but we had to plead and beg and cajole and wheedle and get them to let us shoot one last day and wrap things up. And then the house is gone. It's no longer available to us, so we just, you know, like I say, tap dancing as fast as we can.
But that's such an interesting, you know, again, and you know, as writers, we all know, and going back to the tarot thing, you just don't know. You don't know what's going to trigger that thing. You don't know what's going to push you into doing the story. And this is such a perfect example. I mean, you guys were probably going, "Oh my God, this is the worst thing that ever happened," but
absolutely,
it leads into this great story. And I mean, to me, that really deepened Jesse. I loved the thing with his brother and him kind of taking the rap for the brother, but just the whole thing of the kid. One of my favorite shows is Intervention, and its corollary, Celebrity Rehab. But just that whole thing of just the horror of having this kid in your family. The parents were almost these kind of jokes, but yet I really understood. I just loved that episode, and and again, that I think it was in the next episode when Tess Harper says to him, "Why are you like this?" And then you're just going, "There's no easy answer." He comes from a perfectly nice home, and
well, here's the funny thing about Tess Harper and Michael Boschiver, who play Jesse's parents on the show. We do not see them in any way, shape, or form as villains. We write them to be long-suffering, sweet people who care about their son, but who've just been put through the ringer by his drug dealing and his drug using and his just general antics. And yet, they really do function as the antagonists. And you'll see if you watch season 3, they come back into the story in a fun way that actually relates to the house and the fact that the house is now available to us again. And that's all I'll say. But you know, it's funny when I talk to folks, they say, "Man, I love it. I want to see him stick it to his folks," you know. And it's just funny how
because they love Jesse.
Because they love Jesse so much, but Jesse's really a rotten son in a lot of ways.
He's horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the interesting thing is you love these people so much, and I keep looking at it and trying to remind myself, no, he's a degenerate, he's a drug dealer, he's a drug addict, you know, he's all of those things, and I love that kid. And
yet, he is all those things, and yet, more and more I realize, and again, I only come to this slowly in dribs and drabs, he's all those things, and he's very much the moral center of the show. Very often, he's saying to Mr. White, as he calls him, he's saying to Mr. White, "Are we doing the right thing here? Is this the right thing to do? Are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure, da-da-da-da-da?" Very often, he's as naive and unschooled as he is. People say he's stupid. I think he's just extraordinarily naive and uneducated, which is sort of his own choosing for not paying attention at school. But he's got a lot of street smarts, and he's got
kind.
Yeah.
I mean, the scene where he realizes that Mr. White has cancer, and the compassion that he brings to that moment really makes you just love him so much. But that was another thing that I noticed rewatching it is, again, dark. And I don't just mean dark. I mean, like, again, the depressing decor, the dark lighting, and so many people being kind to each other constantly. Little things, the chemo woman going, "I won't cash your check till Monday," and when Jesse gets beat up one of the bazillion times, he goes, "You know what he reminds me of? Like the Scarecrow from Wizard of Oz, where people just pick him up by his baggy clothes and throw him around and stomp on him like every episode." But he's in the hospital, and that guy, I think his name was Skinny, it's like so nice. He's there, he's looking after him, and the nice janitor who gets completely screwed over,
That's true. No, I don't know. We try to show it all. The good starting point I would advise anyone is what have you not seen before, and put that on the air. And I'm not saying we've reinvented the wheel here or anything. I don't mean that. I'm just saying, use that as your launching point for when you come up with a character or a show, or even when you come up with an individual scene. What's the way to play it that you don't see every day?
Well,
so I think it's part and
again,
parcel.
Reading the pilot script, I think I'm using this term right, but there's a term, obligatory scene. So like there was in the pilot, there's the scene where he has to find out he has terminal cancer, right? That's a scene, you have to have it. But there's no way to write that scene so it's not a cliche, right? Everybody can hear the doctor says, oh, you have terminal cancer, and he's like, really? You know what I mean? It's like there's no way to make it interesting. What was Vince's solution? He can't hear it. All he's doing is looking at the guy's mustard. We know everything that's going on. The guy's like, are you listening? Yeah, I know, I got terminal cancer. But what an inventive way. Talk about a scene being played in a way you've never seen it played before. That's just a good example of an unpredictable way to play it. Let's take one more question, and then, yes. Okay, we'll take two more questions.
Thank you.
Are you okay for us to take?
Fine. I'm very flattered to be here. Thank you.
I'm very curious what your experience was knowing almost nothing, just a layperson's knowledge of meth culture, and then your experience having to research all of it and where you went and what you found out, both at square one, just doing the pilot, and then after you got picked up and you had more resources.
It's a good question. What holds me in good stead is Walter White is kind of me in a sense. I mean, when you think about it, in the sense of Walter White starts from square one. He's never broken the law, and it's not because he's a particularly good person. It's just because he's too scared to. There's probably laws I would break if I wasn't so afraid of retribution and being caught and whatnot. But I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but you get the point. But what holds me in good stead is that I know nothing about meth, but Walter White doesn't either. He doesn't know. He knows what he's read in the New York Times or the Albuquerque Journal or whatnot, which was about my depth of knowledge at the beginning of this whole process. And he learns in fits and starts, as do I, as do all my writers. We learn a lot of, there was a lot, I didn't know anything about meth, except for, again, cursory knowledge I gleaned from newspapers, in my years leading up to that point that I started writing this. But I also didn't know that much, luckily, about terminal cancer, nor do I know that much, or didn't originally, about the inner workings of the DEA, nor do I know that much about chemistry. But, we're all professional liars, in a sense, and I say that kindly. We're all telling stories about things that we don't necessarily know firsthand. And so I guess it's just all a matter of research and did that answer your question? I'm not sure if that
Did you ever but did you ride along with a DEA agent?
I did, as a matter of fact. I as part of where I got the idea from originally, speaking of the DEA portion of it, I was lucky in the X-Files, and then I did one episode of Robbery Homicide Division for my friend Frank Spodnitz, who used to be one of the guys who ran the X-Files, short-lived Michael Mann CBS show. I got to ride around with some real cops a couple times, which was very exciting, riding around Linwood, unincorporated areas, sort of south of downtown LA. That was rode around with a sheriff's deputy for early morning shift one night, and this guy kept apologizing for how quiet the night was. This guy, I'd heard my whole life that a cop draws their gun maybe once, maybe twice in a career. This guy had his gun out 3 or 4 times that night, and he keeps apologizing for how quiet it was. But that was exciting. And getting the vehicle for the basic car, or whatever unit, the squad, the deputy's car. I get in it. The first thing he's telling me is how to unlock the shotgun and how to, call an emergency in. And he says, I got an extra gun in my back pocket here. If I'm down, roll me over and grab it. And I'm like, holy fuck.
Well, that was also something I loved, is like that Walt couldn't even kill himself because he didn't know how to take the safety off the gun.
Yeah. The only reason he's alive and we have a show at all is because he was so ignorant about how to take the safety off a pistol. But what's my point? A lot of the idea, I have to give credit to Frank Spotnitz, a guy I worked with in the X-Files, one of the executive producers on that show, has a brother-in-law who is a DEA agent at the time he was in Riverside. I think he's in downtown LA now. Great guy named Grant, who Hank is not based on him. Hank is a very different person than Grant is, but Grant is, there's a similarity in the sense that both these guys are winners. Certainly when we meet Hank, Hank is, character-wise, structure-wise, is a winner to Walt's loser. And Grant is one of life's winners as well. He's this good-looking macho guy who loves his job, loves what he does, is very good at it, very good DEA agent. And I got to go visit him. I didn't get to ride along with those guys because at the federal level, they don't do ride-alongs. You can actually lose your job for doing that. But he and his partner took me out to lunch one time in Riverside and sort of gave me the poop on how things work and whatnot. And
did they have
helpful.
that kind of dark sense of humor? Because that's another thing. It's like that whole thing where Hank wants his picture taken with, like, when the guy's arm comes off. And I love that shit. It seems so real. It doesn't seem like, these guys, are serious all the time.
Well, they're not serious. I mean, Grant, he's was very professional around me and of the utmost professionalism, but. And never did anything like that around me. I didn't base any of that stuff on Grant. But it's not that hard to extrapolate that guys in close proximity, men, women in close proximity, doing that kind of a tough job, you cannot emotionally invest in it. Which is, again, one of the tropes of TV that, you emotionally invest in every case that comes down the pike. You kind of have to tell a story that way, except in real life, I don't believe it's that way. So it wasn't that hard to extrapolate. You only have so much emotion within you. You can't spend it on strangers.
Well, and also it's such a great, from being in a writer's room, inappropriate humor is just a great stress release.
Exactly.
It's a way you get through this pressure cooker situation. We're going to take one more question. Yes, this gentleman right here.
First, thank you for being here, first and foremost.
I'm sorry, did you already have a question?
Me?
Yeah, did you already ask one?
No.
I'm so sorry. Okay, go on.
Cool.
I was having a flashback.
No worries. Thanks for being here. You mentioned Weeds earlier, and there that shows about a really sexy drug dealer having really just affairs just all over the place, and your show is about a kind of average guy who just sells drugs, and Dexter is about a serial killer, and these are the heroes of the show. Do you ever feel, though, a kind of sense that when you're writing you need to make it where it doesn't seem so glamorous or such a good thing to be doing this?
I do, and there's a lot of good. That's a good question. Well, starting off, again, back to my philosophy of it's awfully hard to reinvent the wheel. You're probably never going to be fully successful at it, but whenever you possibly can, take your knowledge of what's typically done and turn it around. So Miami Vice is a good example. I loved Miami Vice back when it was on in the mid-'80s. I probably watched every episode. That was my idea of a show about drug dealing. It's obviously Miami Vice is from the point of view of the cops trying to stop the drug dealing, but you saw plenty of drug dealers on that show, and they're driving around in Testarossas, and they've got the bodyguards with the Uzis, and they fly in the seaplanes, and it's all very chic and rich and high dollar and glamour, and I thought it was, I love that show. I enjoyed the hell out of it, but I knew that it had already been done, so I figured, what's the opposite way to approach it? Crime kind of pays, maybe sort of, if you work really hard at it. But there's more problems.
It's like
it doesn't pay that well.
We got so much, either the money's getting lost or we can't spend it or all that stuff.
Yeah, and so that was a starting point. Now, the other part of your question. The best thing you can do is be as honest as you can be when you're telling a story. And I, in no way, shape, or form, want to glamorize meth. But the other side of the coin is you don't want to knee-jerk. You don't want to knee-jerk on anything. You don't want to glamorize meth because it's awful, and it really destroys entire communities. It ruins people's lives. There's nothing good about meth. There just isn't. So you don't go around presenting meth as a good thing. But on the other hand, it's sort of like the war on drugs. My girlfriend's brother, who's a chemist, actually, and in some ways, he's nothing like Walt, but in some ways the idea of a chemist is kind of based on my girlfriend's brother a little bit. He said a very wise thing to me once. He said, the trouble with the war on drugs is they kind of present it to kids in high school as drugs are terrible, drugs are bad, there's nothing good about drugs. They're leaving out a crucial point. Drugs, and this is just a fact, it's not a good thing, but it's just a fact. Drugs make you feel really good when you take them, at least in the initial stages. If heroin didn't feel so damn good, nobody'd be on it. If meth didn't make people feel like they could dance and have sex all night, nobody'd be taking it. It would be a lie to leave that out of a complete story on the subject. What you need to do is say, yeah, it makes you feel really good, but damn, it's got some terrible consequences, and you need to know about that. All this to say, I kind of got off on a tangent, but I guess my point is you be as honest as you can be. You try to be as honest as you can be. And if you're telling a story about two meth dealers, there's obviously, I've heard, we've done we've talked to meth dealers, we've talked to law enforcement, we've read every book on the subject, talking about myself and my writers. We've done all the research we can do short of going out and living that life, which, is not worth doing for a damn TV show. But if you're being honest, if you're telling the story as honestly as you can tell it, you realize that there's disincentives for doing drugs, and they're huge, and we all know about them. There's incentives too that if it weren't exciting to live this life of crime, people wouldn't do it. It's not just about the money.
Well, that's what
if it didn't feel good to take meth, people wouldn't take it. It doesn't mean it's a good thing. It doesn't mean we think it's a good thing. It doesn't mean we're glamorizing it. But if you're being honest, you're going to paint a complete picture of the subject.
And I think that that's more valuable rather than the, let's pretend this doesn't exist, just say no society. But I just want to get really briefly back to something that you said before, which is after a while Walt says he's doing it for his family, but he's not. But I really did feel like ultimately that his addiction was the action, was the adrenaline rush of doing all of this stuff, and that you read about people coming back from war and they can't adjust, or if you've seen Hurt Locker, which is a wonderful movie, or even the writers, doing a show, you're in production, it kind of feels like a war, you don't have quite enough time, everything is really intense, you feel like you're gonna die of exhaustion or whatever, and then it ends and it's like
the runner's high at a certain point.
Yeah, you do. I want to thank Vince Gilligan. This has been incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.